There was a time in this country when a marriage meant something, when a young couple's vows were not just words, they were a promise, a binding, a covenant before God and the whole community. When two people said they would love each other forever, they meant it, forever. No matter what came their way, no matter how hard the road got, but somewhere along the way, life got cruel, wars happened, families got pulled apart, letters got lost, phones rang and went unanswered. And some young couples who had loved each other with their whole hearts found themselves separated by circumstances they could not control, by distance, by time, by the simple, devastating reality that the world is a big place and people can disappear into it and never be found. But what happened on that Friday afternoon on the Family Feud stage would remind every single person in that room, and millions of viewers watching at home, that some loves do not die just because they get separated. That some young couples, even after 40 years apart, still carry each other in the deepest part of their hearts. And that sometimes, when you have stopped believing that what you lost is ever coming back, the universe will conspire with a television show to bring it walking right back through the door. Steve Harvey had hosted thousands of Family Feud episodes over the years. He had seen separated families reunite. He had seen long-lost siblings cry in each other's arms on his stage. He thought he had seen every kind of reunion possible. But on this particular Friday, Steve was about to witness something he had never witnessed before. A reunion of two people who had been each other's first love. Two people who had been married, briefly. As teenagers, two people who had been pulled apart by circumstances neither of them had been able to fight against. Two people who had spent the next 40 years building entirely separate lives in different states, with different spouses, with different children. Two people who had assumed that the other one had moved on, forgotten them, possibly even forgotten that they had ever been married in the first place. Both of them had been wrong. Both of them had been carrying that brief teenage marriage in their hearts for 40 straight years. And both of them were about to find out, on a stage in Los Angeles on a regular Friday afternoon, that the love they had buried 4 decades ago had never really been buried at all. It had just been waiting, for the right moment, for the right miracle, to finally come back into the light. Before we get into this beautiful story that will absolutely move you, please do me one quick favor right now. Hit that like button below. Smash that subscribe bell too. Because stories like this one are exactly why we are here. Trust me, you are going to want to stay until the very end of this one. This is not a story you will forget, not tomorrow, not next week, not ever. To understand why this reunion was about to happen, you first need to understand the woman who was standing on that stage. Her name was Margaret Owens. She was 64 years old. A retired librarian from a small town in Texas, a widow of 9 years. And the proud grandmother of 5 grandkids through her 2 adult children, a son and a daughter. Margaret had grown up in a small town in West Virginia in the 1960s. Her father had been a coal miner. Her mother had stayed home to raise Margaret and her 4 brothers. They had been a tight, loving family, hardworking, church-going, the kind of family that put in long hours during the week and went to Sunday school every weekend without fail. When Margaret was 16 years old, she had met a young man named Robert Owens, or wait, that had been her future husband's name, the one she had been married to for 40 years. The young man she had met when she was 16 had a different name. His name was Tommy Lawrence, and Tommy had been the boy who would change Margaret's whole life in ways nobody could have predicted. Tommy had come to West Virginia in the summer of 1976. He had been 17 years old. He had been a Marine, stationed at a small base near Margaret's town for a 6-month rotation before being shipped overseas to a longer assignment. Tommy had grown up in California. He had joined the Marines straight out of high school. He had been tall, funny, kind. Margaret had met him at the diner where she had worked weekends as a waitress. Tommy had walked into that diner one Saturday afternoon. He had ordered a chicken fried steak. He had asked Margaret what time she got off work. Margaret had been so flustered she had spilled coffee all over his table. Tommy had laughed. He had told her not to worry about it. He had asked again what time she got off. Margaret had told him. Tommy had been waiting outside the diner when her shift had ended. They had spent the next 3 months falling completely, ridiculously, head over heels in love. Tommy had been Margaret's first kiss, her first real boyfriend, her first love. Margaret had been the same for Tommy. He had been a young Marine far from home. She had been a small-town girl who had never thought she would meet anybody from California. The two of them had become inseparable in that quiet West Virginia summer. When the summer had been almost over, Tommy had told Margaret he was being deployed overseas in 2 weeks. He had told her he did not want to leave her. He had told her he wanted to marry her, right then, before he shipped out. He had said he wanted her to be his wife. He had said when he came home from the deployment in 18 months he wanted to come home to her. Margaret had said yes. Of course she had said yes. She had been 17 years old. He had been the love of her life. They had driven to a justice of the peace in the next county over the very next weekend, just the two of them. They had not told anybody. Margaret's parents would have been furious. Tommy had no family in West Virginia at all. They had gotten married in a small office. The justice of the peace's wife had been their witness. They had spent one night together as husband and wife in a small motel. And then Tommy had reported back to base. 2 weeks later, he had been deployed. Margaret had not told her parents. She had been afraid. She had decided to wait until Tommy got home. They could announce it together. They could face her parents together. Tommy had agreed. He had written her a long letter the night before he had shipped out. He had told her he loved her. He had told her he would write to her every week. He had told her to count the days until he came home, but the letters had stopped after about 3 months. Margaret had kept writing to him every single week. She had used the address he had given her. None of her letters had come back. None of his letters had come either. After 6 months of complete silence, Margaret had been terrified. She had finally written to the Marine Corps directly. She had asked them about Private Tommy Lawrence. The response had taken weeks. When it had come, the letter had been short, curt. It had said simply that Private Lawrence was no longer at the address she had provided. It had said the Marine Corps could not provide further information. It had said it was sorry for any inconvenience. Margaret had been devastated. She had not known what to do. She had been 17 years old, pregnant, as she would soon find out, and the Marine she had married had disappeared. She had finally told her parents. Her father had been furious. He had wanted to track Tommy down and kill him. Her mother had been heartbroken. They had gone to a lawyer. The lawyer had told them after some research that the marriage might not even be legal. There were complications. Tommy had been 17. He had needed parental consent in some states. There were forms that had not been filed. The whole thing was a mess. Margaret had given birth to a baby girl 7 months later. She had named her Susan. Margaret had given Susan up for adoption. Her parents had insisted. They had said she was too young to raise a child. They had told her to put it behind her and start her life over. Margaret had eventually moved away. She had gone to college. She had become a librarian. She had met Robert Owens, a kind man, when she was 25. She had married him. She had built a beautiful life with him. She had 2 more children with him, a son and a daughter. Robert had passed away 9 years ago. Margaret had grieved him deeply. She had loved him, but she had never told Robert about Tommy, about the brief teenage marriage, about the baby she had given up. She had buried it all in the deepest part of her heart. She had never even spoken Tommy's name out loud after she was 20 years old. She had assumed he had died in the military. She had assumed Susan had been adopted by some good family and was living a happy life somewhere. She had carried the weight of all of it, quietly, privately. For 47 years. When Margaret's daughter Lisa had suggested they apply to Family Feud as a family team, Margaret had said yes. She had no idea, absolutely no idea, that a producer had been working for the last year, that a private investigator had been hired, that a young woman in her 40s named Susan had been found, and that a 65-year-old man named Tommy Lawrence had also been found, and that all of them were waiting backstage. The Owens family came onto the stage with a warm, easy energy. Margaret stood in the middle, a graceful woman with silver hair pulled back in a simple bun. She was wearing a soft lavender sweater. She had a quiet smile, the kind of smile a librarian might have, patient, kind. Her daughter Lisa was on her left, a woman in her mid-30s, beautiful with her father's nose and her mother's eyes. Her son Mark was on her right, a man in his late 30s, married, father of 3. He was Margaret's sister Helen was at the end. Helen was Margaret's older sister, also a widow who had moved in with Margaret 3 years ago after Margaret had gotten lonely. Lisa's husband Tom rounded out the team. Steve came over and shook everybody's hand. When he got to Margaret, he stopped and looked at her with a small, gentle smile. He could tell she was the kind of woman who had lived a quiet, dignified life. "Miss Margaret," Steve said, "tell me about yourself, sweetheart." Margaret smiled. "I am retired now, Mr. Harvey. I was a librarian for 38 years. "A librarian," Steve said. "That is the kind of job that fills your soul. And what about family, husband?" Margaret's smile faded just slightly. "My husband Robert passed away 9 years ago, Mr. Harvey. We had been married for 40 years. 40 years, Steve said. "That is a real marriage. I am so sorry you lost him." Margaret nodded. "Thank you. He was a wonderful man." Steve moved on to greet the rest of the family. He chatted with Lisa. He got a laugh out of Mark. He winked at Helen. The Owens family was clearly close. The audience took to them immediately. The game started. The Owens family was playing against the Garcia family from Florida. The Garcias were a fun, energetic family. The Owens family was quieter, but they were sharp. Lisa got a big answer in the first round. Mark followed up with another good one. Margaret got a few small ones. They were tied with the Garcias going into the second round. It was during the third round that something began to shift. Steve asked a question. "Name something a person might keep that reminds them of a love they have lost." The The Garcias buzzed in first. They got pictures for 40 points. They got jewelry for 32. They got love letters for 28. Margaret was the last to buzz in. She held the microphone for a second too long. Her face had gone still. Her hand was trembling slightly. She finally said very softly, "A wedding ring." The board turned around. A wedding ring was on there, number 58 points. The Owens family clapped politely. Margaret was looking down at her hand, the hand that had her late husband Robert's wedding ring on it. She still wore it. She had not been able to take it off. Steve walked over to her. "Miss Margaret, a wedding ring? You picked that one because of Robert?" Margaret nodded. "Yes, Mr. Harvey, I still wear his ring. I have not been able to take it off in 9 years." Steve smiled gently. "That is a beautiful kind of love." Margaret nodded. She was about to say something else, but she stopped herself. She looked away. Steve noticed it. He noticed everything. He stepped a little closer. "Miss Margaret," he said, "is there something else you wanted to say?" Margaret shook her head quickly. "No, no, Mr. Harvey, I am sorry, it is nothing." Steve looked at her for a long moment. He could feel something. The same way he always felt something when there was more to a story. He did not push. He started to move on, but Margaret's daughter Lisa took a step forward. She had a look on her face, the look of somebody who knew something nobody else knew. She had been holding it in. She could not hold it in anymore. "Mr. Harvey," Lisa said. "Mom, wait, Mom." Margaret turned to look at her daughter, confused. "Lisa, what is it, sweetheart?" Lisa took a breath. She looked at Steve. Steve nodded at her. He had been told. He had been briefed. He had known about all of this since they had walked onto the stage. He had been waiting for the right moment to make it happen. Lisa turned back to her mother. Her eyes were already filling up with tears. "Mom," Lisa said softly, "I have to tell you something I have known for a year, something Mark and I have been keeping a secret. We need to tell you now." Margaret's face had gone pale. "Lisa, what are you talking about?" Mark stepped forward. He took his mother's hand. He was crying too. "Mom," Mark said, "a year ago we found something. We found some old papers. They were in Dad's office in a box of old documents. We were going through it because we were finally going to clean out his old office to turn it into a guest room. We found something we did not understand, a marriage certificate from West Virginia, dated 1976, with your name on it and another name, Tommy Lawrence." Margaret had stopped breathing. Her hand flew up to her mouth. The audience went silent. Lisa continued, her voice trembling. "Mom, we confronted you about it. Do you remember last year we sat down with you? We asked you about it, and you told us the whole story about Tommy, about the secret marriage, about the baby, about Susan, about how you had given her up, about how you had spent your whole life carrying it." Margaret was nodding. She remembered. She had finally told her children last year the story she had buried for 47 years. She had told them about the boy she had loved when she was 17, about the secret marriage, about the baby she had given up, about the lifetime of silence. Lisa wiped her eyes. "Mom, after you told us, Mark and I started talking. We could not let it go. We knew it had been weighing on you. We knew you had carried it your whole life, so we started looking, quietly. We did not tell you because we did not know what we would find. We did not want to break your heart if it was bad news." Margaret was shaking her head. She could not believe what she was hearing. "Lisa, Mark, what did you do?" "Mom," Mark said, "we hired a private investigator. 6 months ago, we told him about Tommy Lawrence. We told him about Susan. We asked him to find anything he could find." Margaret was shaking. And what did he find?" Mark looked at Lisa. Lisa nodded at him. Mark took a breath. He looked at his mother. "Mom, he found Susan, your daughter. She is alive. She is 47 years old. She lives in Phoenix. She is married. She has 2 kids of her own. She has been looking for you for 20 years, Mom. She had been on every adoption reunion website. She had submitted DNA tests to every service. She just had not found you yet until our investigator found her." Margaret could not breathe. She was shaking her head. Tears were pouring down her face. She was clutching at her chest. "Susan," she whispered. "Susan is alive." Lisa was nodding, crying. "She is here, Mom. She flew in from Phoenix this morning. She is backstage. She has been waiting all morning to meet you." Margaret was sobbing now. She was completely overwhelmed. She had assumed her daughter would never want to meet her. She had assumed the adoptive family would have been told her birth mother had been a teenager who had not wanted her. She had assumed Susan would have hated her. "Lisa," Margaret whispered, Does she want to see me?" "Mom," Lisa said, "she has wanted to see you her whole life. She has been waiting 47 years. Steve stepped forward. He had been standing back, letting the moment happen, but he took a small step closer now. He took Margaret's hand. "Miss Margaret," Steve said gently, "Sweetheart, are you ready to meet your daughter?" Margaret nodded slowly. She was trembling, but she nodded. Steve gestured toward the wings. From behind the curtain, a woman walked out slowly. A woman in her late 40s, beautiful, with Margaret's face, Margaret's eyes, Margaret's smile. She was holding a small bouquet of flowers in her hand. She was crying. She was walking like she was afraid the moment was not real. Margaret saw her, and she just stopped breathing for a moment. Her hand went limp in Steve's. She stared. She studied her daughter's face. She was looking at the baby she had held in a hospital for 2 days 47 years ago. The baby she had been forced to give up. The baby she had thought about every single day for the rest of her life. Susan walked carefully across the stage. She stopped about 6 feet away from Margaret. She was crying so hard she could not speak. Margaret could not speak either. The two women just stared at each other for a long moment. Then Margaret took a step toward her daughter. Then another. Then she ran. She covered the last few feet in 3 quick steps. She crashed into her daughter's arms. And the two of them, mother and daughter, separated for 47 years, finally fell into each other's arms. Steve Harvey was crying. The audience was crying. Lisa and Mark were crying. Helen, Margaret's sister, was crying. The whole studio was a mess of tears, but Steve was not done. He took a deep breath. He stepped forward. He cleared his throat. "Miss Margaret," he said, "I am sorry to interrupt this beautiful moment, but there is one more person I need you to see." Margaret slowly pulled back from her daughter, Susan. She looked at Steve. She was confused. She did not understand. There was nobody else. Could there be? Steve nodded gently at her. "Miss Margaret, sweetheart, your kids did not just look for Susan. They looked for somebody else, too." Margaret's face changed. Her hand flew to her mouth. She looked at Steve. She looked at her son, Mark. She looked at her daughter, Lisa. "No," Margaret whispered. "No, Lisa, Mark, tell me you did not." Lisa stepped forward. She took her mother's other hand. "Mom, we did. We hired the investigator to look for both of them. We could not just look for Susan and not look for Tommy. He was part of your story, too." Margaret was shaking her head. She was breathing too fast. "Lisa, he probably has a family. He probably moved on. He probably never thinks about me. I cannot do this." "I cannot." Mark squeezed her hand. "Mom, listen to us. Just listen. Our investigator found him, too. It took longer. He had to track down old Marine records. He had to verify everything. But he found him, Tommy Lawrence. He is 65 years old. He lives in Oregon. He worked as a logger his whole life. He had 3 kids of his own from a marriage that ended in divorce 12 years ago. And Mom, he never forgot about you. He never forgot." Margaret was sobbing. "Mark." "Lisa, what happened to him? Why did the letters stop?" Lisa was crying, too. "Mom, we have his whole story. He is going to tell it to you himself. Are you ready?" Margaret could barely nod. She was trembling. Susan was holding her up on one side. Lisa was holding her on the other side. Steve gestured toward the wings. From behind the curtain, an older man walked out. He was 65 years old. He had silver hair, neatly combed, a trimmed gray beard. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt tucked into pressed jeans. He was wearing his Marine veteran's cap on his head. His eyes were red. He had been crying for the last hour ever since he had been told that Margaret had walked onto the stage. Margaret saw him, and her knees buckled. Lisa and Susan caught her. Helen rushed over from the end of the line. Margaret was staring at this man. Through 40 years, she was looking at the boy she had married in 1976, the boy she had loved. Boy she had thought she had lost forever. Tommy stopped about 10 feet away from Margaret. He could not move closer. He was crying too hard. He was just looking at her. She had aged. She was no longer the 17-year-old girl he had married. She had silver hair now, lines around her eyes, but she was still Margaret. He could still see her. He could still see the girl he had fallen in love with on a summer day at a diner in West Virginia. "Margaret," Tommy whispered. His voice was rough, worn. "Margaret, honey, is it really you?" Margaret nodded. She could not speak. Tears were pouring down her face. Tommy took a step closer. "Margaret, I have been looking for you for 30 years. I have been looking. I never stopped." Margaret looked at him through her tears. "Tommy, what happened to you? Why did your letters stop?" Tommy closed his eyes. He took a long breath. When he opened his eyes, they were full of tears, too. "Margaret, I have to tell you. I have wanted to tell you for 40 years. 6 weeks after I shipped out, I was hit. I was wounded, bad, shrapnel from an explosion. I was in a coma for almost 2 months. When I came out of it, I was in a military hospital in Germany. I had brain damage. I had memory loss. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive." Margaret was crying, quietly now, listening. Tommy continued. "I was in that hospital in Germany for almost a year. By the time I got my memory back, by the time I could function again, by the time I tried to write to you. The address I had for you, the boarding house where you had been living, it had been torn down. I tried to find your parents. They had moved. They had not left a forwarding address. I did not know where you were. I tried for years, Margaret, years." Margaret was nodding. She understood. She had been a 16-year-old girl with no permanent address. Her parents had moved twice in those years. Tommy continued. "Eventually, I had to accept that I had lost you. I came back to the United States. I tried to build a life. I got married twice. The first marriage did not last. The second one lasted longer. We had 3 kids together, but it ended in divorce 12 years ago. We were not really a match. I had spent my whole life still loving you, Margaret. I had never been able to give my whole heart to anybody else. My second wife knew it. She had asked me about it many times. I had finally told her about you about 10 years before she left me, about our marriage in West Virginia, about how I had lost you in the war." Margaret was crying, holding onto Susan and Lisa. Looking at the man she had married when she was 17, Tommy continued. I have been looking for you, Margaret, since the divorce. 12 years ago, I have been looking. I tried every reunion site. I tried Marine Records. I tried to find your parents. Nothing worked. Then 6 months ago, this private investigator called me. He told me Lisa and Mark had hired him. He told me your story. He told me about Susan. He told me what you had done, what you had given up. I have not been able to think about anything else for the last 6 months. Tommy took another step closer. And Margaret, there is one more thing. I am so sorry about Susan. I should have been there. If I had known, I would have come back. I would have done anything. I am so sorry I was not there for her. For you, I am so sorry. Margaret could not speak. She just shook her head. She wanted to tell him it was not his fault. He had been wounded. He had been in a coma. There was nothing to apologize for. She wanted to say all of it, but the words would not come out. Tommy walked the rest of the way across the stage. He stopped right in front of Margaret. They were the same height as they had been when they were 17. Margaret had grown a little. Tommy had stayed the same. He looked into her eyes for a long moment. He took both of her hands. Margaret, he whispered, I have loved you every day for the last 40 years, every single day. I do not know if I deserve another chance. I do not know what you want. I do not even know what I am asking. I just needed to see you. I needed to tell you. Margaret could not hold it in anymore. She fell into Tommy's arms. The two of them stood there in the middle of the stage, holding each other. Susan stood beside them, her arm linked through her mother's, finally getting to be near both of her biological parents at the same time. For the first time in her entire life, the audience was completely destroyed. Steve Harvey halted the rest of the taping. He told both families they would be flown back for another episode. The Garcia family from Florida was crying along with everyone else. The grandfather of the Garcia family walked over to Margaret and Tommy. He held both of their hands. He told them that he had been separated from his own first love during World War II, that he had spent 50 years wondering what had happened to her, that she had passed away 10 years before he had finally found her family. He told them not to waste a single day. He told them to be grateful for the time they had now. The episode aired 16 days later. The network had decided to air it as a special 2-hour broadcast. Within 24 hours of airing, the clip of Tommy walking out from the wings had been viewed more than 150 million times. It became the most viewed Family Feud clip in the show's history. News outlets across the country picked up the story. Major morning shows wanted to interview Margaret and Tommy and Susan. Magazines wanted to do features. They did very few of the interviews. The three of them were quiet, private people who wanted to keep most of the story for themselves. But the impact extended far beyond their family. A movement started across the country. People began sharing their own stories of lost loves and missed connections. Stories of people who had been searching for somebody for years. Stories of veterans who had lost touch with girls back home during deployments and never been able to find them again. The hashtag, Never Stop Looking, trended for nearly 2 months. DNA testing companies and people search websites reported their largest spike in business in years. One company said the surge was bigger than anything they had ever seen. Steve Harvey used the attention to do something significant. Within a month of the episode airing, he announced a new foundation called the Margaret and Tommy Reconnection Fund. Its mission was to help separated families and lost loves find each other. The fund hired professional investigators, paid for DNA testing, and provided emotional support and counseling for people going through the process. Within its first year, the fund had helped over 1,500 families locate lost loved ones. Some of those reunions ended joyfully. Some of them ended in heartbreak when people discovered that the loved one they had been searching for had already passed away. But every single one of them got an answer. Every single one of them got peace. Margaret and Tommy did not waste a single day after the taping. Tommy flew back to Texas with Margaret. He stayed for 2 weeks. They sat on her back porch every evening. They talked, they cried, they held hands the way they had held hands in West Virginia in 1976. Susan came too. She brought her kids. Margaret got to meet her grandchildren that she had never known about. 2 beautiful kids, a boy and a girl. Both of them looked like Margaret. Susan's husband flew in too. The whole new extended family gathered at Margaret's house in Texas. Margaret's son Mark and daughter Lisa welcomed their new sister Susan with open arms. They welcomed Tommy too. The blended family came together. It was awkward at first. It was strange, but it was beautiful. After 2 weeks, Tommy went back to Oregon to handle his affairs. He had decided. He was going to move to Texas. He was going to be near Margaret. They had spent 40 years apart. They were not going to spend another year apart if they could help it. Margaret had asked him to come live with her. Tommy had said no. He said they should take it slow. They should rebuild what they had been forced to lose. They were not 17 anymore. He had bought a small house just 2 blocks away from Margaret, close enough to walk over, far enough apart that they could each have their own space. They did not get remarried right away. They wanted to take their time. They wanted to date. They wanted to actually have the courtship they had never got to have at 17. Tommy took Margaret to the movies. He took her to dinner. He brought her flowers. He held doors open for her. He treated her the way he had wanted to treat her in 1976 but had never gotten the chance to. About 2 years after that Family Feud taping, Tommy got down on one knee in Margaret's kitchen. He had a small ring in his hand. He asked her to marry him again. Properly this time. Margaret had said yes through tears. They got married in a small ceremony at her church. Just family. Margaret was 66 years old. Tommy was 67. It was the second wedding for both of them in this story. The first one had been when they were teenagers. The second one was now. Susan walked her mother down the aisle. Margaret's 2 grown kids, Lisa and Mark, stood up for their mother. Tommy's 3 grown kids stood up for their father. The whole big blended family was there. Susan and Margaret built a deep relationship. They visited each other constantly. Susan flew to Texas. Margaret flew to Phoenix. They talked on the phone every day. Susan learned everything she could about her birth mother. Margaret learned everything she could about her oldest daughter. The years they had been separated were not days they could get back, but they could fill the rest of their lives with each other. And they did. Susan also got close to Tommy. He was her biological father. The man she had never known existed for 47 years. They built their own relationship. Tommy taught her things he wished he had taught her when she was a little girl. He told her about her grandparents, about his own family in California. He gave her a father in her late 40s that she had never had before. It was strange. It was wonderful. It was a gift that none of them had ever expected to receive. Tommy and Margaret had 8 more years together. 8 beautiful, full, peaceful years of being married to the love of their lives. They traveled. They went to the Grand Canyon. They went to Hawaii. They went to West Virginia where they had first met, and they walked through the old neighborhood. The diner where Margaret had worked was gone. So was the boarding house where she had lived. But the church where they had attended a few times together was still standing. They sat in a back pew. They held hands. They prayed. When Tommy passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75, Margaret was holding his hand. He had been sick for several months. Margaret had cared for him every single day. The way she had wanted to care for him 47 years earlier when he had been wounded in the war. She had finally gotten the chance to love him the way she had always wanted to love him. And she had given him the most peaceful end any man could have asked for. Margaret lived for another 4 years after Tommy passed. She passed away peacefully, too, at the age of 78, surrounded by her 3 grown children. Lisa, Mark, and Susan. The 3 of them, 2 children from her marriage to Robert and 1 child from her marriage to Tommy, held each other and grieved their mother together. They had become like real siblings in the years since the Family Feud reunion. They had become a family, the way Margaret had always dreamed they could be. Steve Harvey kept a photograph in his office from that day on the show. It was a picture of Margaret and Tommy embracing for the first time in 40 years. Susan standing beside them, the whole family on the stage behind them. Steve has said many times that it was one of the most important moments he has ever been part of in his entire career. He says he keeps it as a reminder that some loves never die, that some people are meant to find each other again, and that the world is full of stories waiting to be put right. Susan often says when people ask her about her story the same thing. She says, "I spent 47 years thinking I had been given up by a mother who did not want me. I spent 47 years not knowing my father even existed. And then in one afternoon, I got both of them back. The world is full of small miracles. Sometimes the biggest miracle of your life is just somebody making a phone call." That is the legacy. That is the story. A teenage girl from West Virginia who fell in love with a Marine in the summer of 1976. A young couple who got married in secret. A war that wounded the husband and stole his memory. A baby given up for adoption. 47 years of silence between 3 people who should never have been separated in the first place. A daughter who never gave up looking for her birth mother. A son and daughter who hired a private investigator. A television show that opened its stage to a miracle. And a family that finally, after almost 5 decades, was made whole. If this story moved you the way it moved me, please do me a favor right now. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already. And share this video with somebody who needs to hear this message. And if there is somebody you have been searching for, somebody you lost touch with years ago, somebody you assumed was gone, do not give up. Keep looking. Take a DNA test. Hire an investigator. Check the social media, make the phone calls, do whatever you can, because somewhere out there that person might be looking for you too. They might be sitting in a quiet living room tonight, wondering if you ever think about them, hoping, praying, believing. Sometimes the biggest miracle of your life is just one phone call away. Thank you for watching. And remember, no love is ever truly lost. Some loves are just waiting for the right moment to come back home.